In his past life, Murong Qing was blinded by hypocritical love, resulting in a tragic death by poisoned wine and the destruction of his entire clan. Reborn and returning, Murong Qingtang, the legitimate young lady of the southern prince's mansion, must make scumbags and lowly women pay the price. Revenge starts by getting rid of the scumbag and designing a wrong marriage. I originally wanted to borrow this short-lived ghost general who got married wrongly, in order to die early and show off my skills, but I didn't expect the general to hide it deep, so the two of them colluded in collusion, Murong Qing said. How could my weak and helpless husband be a cunning and scheming villain? General sick seedling. How could my virtuous wife be a decisive and wicked woman in killing and attacking? Keywords of the novel. After being wrongly married, I became the general's white moonlight without a pop-up window. After being wrongly married, I became the general's white moonlight. Download the complete set of TXT. After being wrongly married, I became the general's white moonlight. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Full door plagiarism. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 1. Full door plagiarism. The Great Shun dynasty lasted for 5 years, with scorching sun. In the death row, Murong Qing was tied to a pillar, and 2 stoves were specially lit on both sides for her. As if baking her over a fire, she blushed and couldn't breathe, as hot as ever. But he kept repeating over and over again, I have never done anything against your majesty. I have never done anything against your majesty. 3 days ago, she had some alcohol and went back to the palace to rest in a daze. She fell asleep unconscious, but she didn't expect to be awakened soon by a basin of cold water. She had no idea what had happened, and when she woke up, she saw a guard lying beside her. 2 people share the same bed and sleep in the same clothes. At that time, Xianggong, dressed in a dragon robe, and the favored Yuan Guifei by Menjing were still standing by the bed. She expected to be framed, but to her surprise, Xianggong didn't even give her an opportunity to explain and directly ordered someone to put her in death row. Although it was only 3 days, she had already tried all kinds of torture tools in death row on her. I was already feeling unwell when I came in, and now I only have 1 breath left to hang outside the prison cell. Xianggong looked sinister behind his hands and said, as I have seen with my own eyes, can I still wrongly accuse you? Bai Menjing, standing beside Xianggong, looked sorrowfully at Murong Qing, who was tormented by both human and ghostly beings in the prison cell. Sister, how could you make such a big mistake? How could this embarrass your majesty? After finishing speaking, he gently shook Xianggong's sleeve. Your majesty, my concubine and my sister are like their own sisters. My sister has made a big mistake, and my concubine is also a sister. I should persuade her earlier. Can you spare my sister this time? Spare her. Humph. Xianggong sneered coldly, his hawk-like eyes filled with disgust. How can I spare such a lewd woman who has committed a great mistake? Even if this lewd woman is subjected to countless cuts and tribulations, it is not an exaggeration. As soon as she finished speaking, Bai Menjing turned her head and began to vomit on the side. Xianggong furrowed his brows and said, this prison must be so foul-smelling that the shadows can't bear the smell. You go out first, I have something to tell this slut about. Bai Menjing's retching gradually stopped, and she raised her hand to follow her chest, smiling as she looked at Xianggong. The prison cell is indeed unpleasant, but it's not that I can't bear the smell, it's just. She bit her lower lip lightly, her face showing shyness, and lightly caressed her abdomen with 1 hand. The meaning goes without saying. Xianggong was taken aback and said, Inger, have you obtained a dragon heir? He had a smile on his face and even bent down to look at Bai Menjing's abdomen. Bai Menjing nodded lightly and said, my concubine is weak, and the dragon heir is still less than 3 months old. She is unstable and afraid of a happy occasion, so she has not been publicly disclosed. My eyelashes trembled slightly as I spoke, and I lifted my eyelids to look at Murong Qing in the cell. Sister loves children the most. If she hadn't been so confused before, it would have been great if she had entrusted the care and upbringing of the emperor's son to her sister. In the dimly lit cell, a hint of darkness and cunning flashed in Bai Menjing's eyes. Unfortunately, Xianggong only focused on her abdomen and did not notice her expression. Murong Qing's head was drowsy, but at this moment, he was inexplicably clear, able to see Bai Menjing's expression clearly. It's her. It must be Bai Menjing who framed her. It turned out that Bai Menjing, whom she regarded as her own sister, caused her harm. But upon seeing the dazzling smile on Xianggong's face, Murong Qing felt powerless to speak. He didn't even give her the opportunity to explain. Would he believe her if she explained at this time? Giving this lewd woman custody will only teach the emperor bad. Xianggong's expression suddenly darkened, and his cold gaze turned to Murong Qing, saying, "The empress has committed such a deadly crime of disobedience to women's morality. In the southern region, she has colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country, intending to rebel. Your Murong family is really good." Murong Qing only felt a loud bang in his mind. Rebellion. How could Father King rebel? Her crimson eyes were full of disbelief, and she said with all her might, "No. It's impossible, my father will never. He will never collude with the enemy or betray the country. He will never rebel. The southern marquis's mansion is guarded by loyal generals from all over the country, with the sole intention of guarding the great Shun dynasty. She never believed that her father would collude with the enemy and betray the country." Xianggong's face was as cold as ice, with a hint of bloodthirsty intent all over his body. "The evidence of this matter is conclusive. I have issued an order to have the entire southern marquis's mansion executed, and 3 days from now will be the day of execution." "No." Murong Qing's voice was hoarse and exhausted. She twisted her hands desperately, trying to break free from the rope tied to her wrist. "Xianggong, how many lives did my Murong family's children sacrifice to protect you from ascending the throne? How could you be so ungrateful? The Murong family will never collude with the enemy or betray the country. Never." She trembled with hatred, forgetting even the etiquette of a ruler and minister for a moment, and even calling out Xianggong's name. Since ancient times, emperors have been the most ruthless people in the world. It was the Murong family who strongly supported the third prince in the struggle for succession, allowing Xianggong, who was not considered favored, to successfully ascend to the throne. Since ascending to the throne, Xianggong has executed ministers who had opposed him on various grounds, and it was not until this year that it gradually subsided. And now that the country has just stabilized, can't he tolerate the meritorious figure of the Murong family anymore? After Murong Qing understood, he couldn't help but lower his head when he saw his indifferent expression. But tears flickered in my eyes, and I couldn't stop laughing. "Ha! Xianggong, are you not afraid of going to hell after death if you act like this?" In the dimly lit cell, those who listen to laughter are shivering with fear. Xianggong furrowed his brows and turned his head to look at Bai Menjing. "Ying'er is pregnant, go out first," he said. Bai Menjing knew that Xianggong was going to say something to Murong Qing that she couldn't listen to, so she wisely left the prison cell. The accompanying guards and eunuchs also left together. It wasn't until there were only Xianggong and Murong Qing left in the prison cell that he spoke up. "What's the fear of hell? I can't sit on this dragon chair comfortably, which is the most uncomfortable." The two of them looked at each other through the wooden stakes in the cell. Murong Qing looked at the dragon robe and felt a daze. In order to secure the throne, the entire Murong family was executed. What a trick to cross the river and demolish the bridge. Her twisted wrist suddenly stopped moving, and tears slid down her cheeks to her chin before falling to the ground. "My eyes are filled with despair. Third brother, demote them to commoners. I beg you. Please keep their lives." Murong Qing had to put down his posture and even endure the feeling of nausea to summon the long-lost title, hoping that he could spare the Murong family for the sake of past affection. Xing Xiuyan's face remained calm and cold. Murong Qing saw clearly, closed his eyes, and spoke decisively, I have committed a great mistake and deserve to be punished. Murong's family is full of loyalty, and he has sacrificed so much blood and tears for his majesty. Your majesty should consider the merits and demerits to be equal, and spare their lives, even if they are exiled. Your majesty's anger is hard to calm. I know that since your majesty wants to kill, let's kill me. Since Qing'er said so, let's keep them alive and give them poisonous wine, white silk, and a dagger. Choose one, and it will also give you a decent appearance. Xing Xiuyan seemed to have given a great gift, but even so, Murong Qing still had to endure his hatred and say, Thank you very much, your majesty. As soon as she finished speaking, the eunuch brought the 3-piece set, clearly prepared. Xing Xiuyan glanced at the wine and turned around before leaving only one sentence. Watch her choose. After a stick of incense, under the gaze of the eunuch, Murong Qing chose poisonous wine and drank it all in one gulp. She immediately fell to the ground in pain, curled up, feeling as if thousands of ants were gnawing on her bone marrow, making life more difficult than death. Empress Yuan asked the servant to give a message to the empress. The eunuch bent down and said, the southern marquis's mansion was already hacked by the whole family yesterday. The empress can go to the underworld to reunite with them. Murong Qingru was struck by a bolt from the blue and spoke with difficulty, No. Your Majesty, he promised. Before she could finish speaking, blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth, and her mouth was filled with blood, making it impossible for her to even say the last word. He still deceived her and made her willingly die. But still unable to protect the Murong family. Murong Qing closed his eyes with hatred, only feeling his soul being pulled away inch by inch. Xing Xiuyan, if there is an afterlife, I, Murong Qing, swear to demand that you pay for it with blood, and that life is not worth death. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Sister Qing was also called by you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Sister Qing was also called by you. The noisy and lively sound gave Murong Qing a headache. In the next moment, I suddenly realized something and opened my eyes. Suddenly, Murong Qing's eyes turned red, but he was stunned. Redwood tables and chairs, with wine and glasses still placed on the table, and the curtains on the bed have been changed to red. Even what she is wearing is a bright red wedding dress. She remembered that the interior decoration was the residence of the Southern Marquis's mansion in Jingzhou, which was bestowed by His Majesty during the 7th year of the Dashun pilgrimage. His Majesty is not Xing Xiuyan, but his father, Xinglin. But how could the hell be the same as their residence in Jingzhou? Just as I was thinking about it, the door creaked as it was pushed open. Ping'er slowly walked in, holding a wooden pallet with 2 plates of pastries and a portion of brewed tea on top. But he didn't notice the shocked look on Murong Qing's face. Ping'er, I finally saw you. Murong Qing felt his eyes tingling, and tears welled up unconsciously. On the day she and the guards were framed, Xing Xiuyan did not give her an opportunity to explain, so he directly ordered her to be put into death row. It was Ping'er who kept defending her, kowtowing and bleeding profusely. I didn't expect Xing Xiuyan to ruthlessly kill her, obviously feeling guilty and unwilling to speak more. I didn't expect that she could still see Ping'er in the underworld. Ping'er smiled and placed the wooden pallet on the table. Miss, you are so happy and confused. When you talk, it's hard to understand. How did you finally see a servant? I have been in the mansion for 13 years, but on which day did Miss not see a servant? As he spoke, he poured a cup of tea and then took down the pastry from the wooden tray and placed it on the table. Miss, come and eat some food first to make a cushion. Otherwise, the 3rd prince will arrive later. After a few hours on the way, if we arrive at the 3rd prince's mansion, we will have to pay respects again. I'm afraid Miss will be too hungry to bear it. The 3rd prince. Murong Qing widened his eyes in surprise and carefully looked around. Not right. This doesn't seem like an underworld. She lowered her head and pinched her hand, causing her to burst into tears in pain. It hurts. She's still alive. Ping'er lifted her feet and walked towards Murong Qing, saying, I know Miss is happy, but I always have to eat some cushions for this pastry. This was specially ordered by the third young master to be made in the kitchen, all of which Miss loves to eat. Murong Qing looked at Ping'er in front of him, and some thoughts had already been sorted out in his mind. She once read a strange phenomenon in a book that a person who dies without closing their eyes may have a chance to be reborn. I think she has been reborn now. Sister Qing. A familiar voice sounded, and then Bai Menjing stepped into the room. At the moment when Murong Qing saw Bai Menjing, his eyebrows and eyes suddenly became sharp, and a towering hatred surged in his eyes. What are you doing here? Although the events of the previous life were designed by Xianggong, Bai Menjing must have been involved. These two people are like birds of a feather, not a single good thing. Perhaps because Murong Qing's voice was too cold, Bai Menjing was stunned for a moment, but after realizing it, she walked towards Murong Qing and said, My younger sister is here to congratulate my sister and the third prince. I wish my sister and the third prince 100 years of love and longevity. After speaking, he bent his knees and saluted. Murong Qing sat by the bed, his eyes could not hide his disgust. Bless my heart. As for the name of this sister, I don't remember when my father, wife and concubine gave birth to a sister for me. Speaking of which, Bai Menjing was just a maid of their southern marquis' mansion, but she was not a slave. It was her second brother who went out to see her selling herself to bury her father that day, which was truly pitiful, that he bought this Bai Menjing. Unfortunately, due to having 3 older brothers above her, she had long thought of wanting a sister. When she saw the well-behaved Bai Menjing, she regarded her as her own sister and had to share everything good with her. Even Bai Menjing's entry into the palace was recommended by her. But unexpectedly, in the end, this good sister teamed up with Xianggong to harm her in the southern marquis' mansion. But since she has already been reborn, it is also time for her to experience what life is better than death. Bai Menjing didn't know why Murong Qing's temperament had changed so much, but she still used her old tricks. Tears rolled down her eyes, and she looked like I still pity her. What's wrong with Sister Qing? I really don't know how I offended her, she said as he spoke. He knelt down, but his waist was straight and he looked neither humble nor arrogant. If my younger sister makes a mistake, please let me know so that I know where I went wrong. Murong Qingling sneered, if you commit any wrongdoing below, the first offense is that you are a maid of the marquis' mansion, wearing golden silk and satin. The second offense is that you cried and cried on the day of our wedding to the third prince. The third offense is that if we talk about your mistake, we cannot finish it for 3 days and 3 nights. Do you still want to listen? Bai Menjing was completely stunned, even Ping'er beside her was stunned. After all, in the past, Murong Qing indulged Bai Menjing to a great extent, and everyone in the southern marquis' mansion knew about it. Why are you speaking so harshly today? Murong Qing looked at Bai Menjing who was still kneeling on the ground and said, if you want to kneel, then find an empty ground to kneel and don't get in my way. Bai Menjing panicked and quickly explained, Sister Qing. Miss, I said, there are no sisters. Murong Qingzhao stood up and glared at her with a terrifying aura. Did you also call Sister Qing? How should a maid address the master of the family? Do you want me to teach you? Bai Menjing's body trembled with fear as she hurriedly replied, I have written it down, I will leave first. After speaking, he left as if fleeing. Ping'er raised her hand to help Murong Qing stroke her back and said, Miss, what happened today? Murong Qing calmed his mind and slowly sat down, but the thought of the past life still made his body tremble with hatred. It's nothing, I just saw something clearly. Seeing that Murong Qing didn't want to say much, Ping'er didn't dare to ask any further. He helped her calm down for a while and brought her tea and pastries, urging her to eat more. Murong Qingxin felt angry, even after eating his favorite pastry from the past, he still felt that it was tasteless. Suddenly, I heard the sound of drums and gongs blowing outside, like a welcoming sound. "Is it the third prince's wedding procession coming?" she asked. Ping'er looked into the courtyard and saw everyone busy and said, "No, this should be General Pei's wedding procession." If the third prince had come, the women in the courtyard would have gone to the door to beg for some wedding money long ago. General Pei. Murong Qing furrowed his eyebrows and was suddenly surprised when he realized it. Is it General Pei of the Xianggong army? Although she had never seen this person before, she also knew that he was brave and skilled in battle, and was appointed as the Grand General of Xianggong at a young age. However, for some unknown reason, that person fell ill immediately after being infected, not even inquiring about military affairs, and it was unclear whether it was a real illness or a fake one. Ping'er nodded and said, "It's this person." Murong Qing remembered that they did indeed get married on the same day in the previous life. He remembered that it was raining heavily that day, and both wedding procession went into the Bodhisattva temple to shelter from the rain. The person who married General Pei seemed to have been crying all along. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Wedding. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Wedding. At that time, she didn't ask much, let alone take it to heart. Just as she was thinking about it, Ping'er sighed and said, "Poor Miss Lu San. Since her father didn't love her mother, she still wants to marry a sick seedling. Miss is not aware of this. There are rumors in Jingzhou that General Pei won't live for 3 months, and even a chicken has been found to replace him in the wedding. I'm afraid Miss Lu San will be widowed as soon as she gets married." Upon hearing these words, Murong Qing's eyes lit up. What if she didn't live for 3 months? She would rather be a widow than marry that ruthless beast. Less than a stick of incense, Xianggong rode a tall horse and came to welcome the wedding. Murong Qing also came out of the room and felt nauseous when he saw Xianggong. But in order to endure the disgust in the future, we bid farewell to the Southern Ho family together. After the two of them saluted, Nanjing Ho turned his head and wiped the corners of his eyes, with red eyes. He stood up and said, "Your Highness, I am just such a daughter. I have always been spoiled. If she is wrong in the future, I hope your Highness can inform me. I will definitely discipline her well and never let your Highness worry about it." Xianggong turned his head to look at Murong Qing, his eyes filled with indulgence and said, "Marquis, you speak too seriously. Qing'er has always been sensible and well-behaved. If there is any conflict, it must be the fault of the younger generation. Sincere language and humble attitude." If Murong Qing had not known what he had done in his previous life, he would have been misled by his appearance. Nanjing Ho nodded and said, "So, I will hand over Qing'er to His Highness San." After speaking, he looked at Murong Qing with reluctance. "Qing'er, if you have anything to do in the future, write a letter and send it to the southern border. Father Wang will always be your support." Murong Qing felt tears in her eyes and choked up, saying, "My daughter has taken note." The old princess touched the elbow of Nanjing Ho and scolded in a low voice, "On a day of great joy, I must make Qing'er cry in order to be happy. Hurry up and arrange the matter of getting into the sedan chair, don't miss the auspicious time." Upon hearing this, Nanjing nodded and hurriedly went to arrange things. The old princess took Murong Qing a few steps to the side and whispered, "Qing'er, since you are married, you will have a good life with the third prince in the future. After all, you are married to a relative of the imperial family, and your behavior should not lose your highness's face. You should be polite, magnanimous, and obey his orders in everything. Have you recorded this?" Murong Qing knew that his mother was doing it for her good. After all, she married from her husband. How could she possibly listen to Xianggong, who beheaded the entire southern marquis's mansion in the previous life? But in front of the old princess, she still nodded and said, "My daughter has taken note." The sound of drums and gongs outside had just stopped for less than a moment before it rang out again. "It's time to get on the sedan." The crown prince of the marquis's mansion, Murong Xiao, carried Murong Qing onto the sedan chair and cautioned anxiously, "Qinger, after you return home, we will return to the southern border. There must be no one on the border to avoid being missed by neighboring countries. You are alone in Jingzhou, so be careful in all things." Under the cover, Murong Qing bit her lower lip tightly and choked up with a sob. Murong Xiao turned his head to look at her. Although he was covering his head, he could still feel her crying. He had to endure the sadness in his heart and comfort her with a smile. "Women are always going to get married, and Brother Dikong will come to see you. But when you are in Jingzhou, you also need to be clever, at least you can protect yourself." Murong Qing sobbed and nodded, "Big brother, I will protect myself and I will also protect the marquis's mansion." For no reason, Murong Xiao said this sentence, and upon hearing it, he looked puzzled. But Murong Qing had already walked up to the sedan chair and didn't ask much. He slowly put Murong Qing into the sedan chair and whispered, "Just protect yourself. The marquis mansion has us." After speaking, he retreated and the sedan bearers lifted the flower sedan chair. Perhaps the time had come, and before the people of the marquis's mansion could say a few more words to Murong Qing, the wedding procession left in a grand manner, but in less than half an hour, the originally clear sky turned into a dark and overwhelming sky. In the next moment, it rained heavily and a gust of wind struck. The wedding procession had to enter the passing Bodhisattva temple to take shelter from the rain, and coincidentally encountered the wedding procession from the general's mansion. Two teams entered the Bodhisattva temple simultaneously, with a total of 200 to 300 people. But fortunately, everyone took care of the bride, so they left the only small house in the temple for the two of them, while the others waited in the main hall for the rain to clear up. Inside the cabin, intermittent choking sounds from the woman could be heard from the side. Murong Qing lifted his head and asked in a warm voice, "But Miss Lu San?" The woman folded the cover up and looked at Murong Qing with red eyes. "Exactly. I am Murong Qing from the southern marquis's mansion." Murong Qing first introduced herself before approaching and sitting next to her. "Why are you crying so sadly?" Lu Qing shook her head, and the handkerchief in her hand touched the corner of her eye. "No, it's not true. It's just because the person I'm going to marry is General Pei. They say General Pei is critically ill and his life is not long. I don't want to be a widow at a young age." After speaking, the sound of crying grew louder, as if one had suffered a great deal of injustice. Murong Qing raised his hand to help her wipe away her tears. Taking advantage of the situation, he took off her hat and pondered, saying, "Miss Lu's charming appearance makes her face cry. What should we do if we marry into a husband's family and dislike her?" As soon as the words fell, Lu Qing instantly stopped crying. Lu Qing still choked up and said, "What sister said is true. I am just an illegitimate descendant of the Shangshu family. With such an identity, it would be bad if I were to be despised by my husband's family again." Murong Qing held the two caps together, took off the bracelet from his hand, and without hesitation, forcefully put it on for Lu Qing. "You've already called me sister. I can't just shout sister for nothing, so I'll give you this bracelet." Lu Qing was originally born from a commoner, and her wedding wrist was also empty. She had never worn such a high-quality bracelet before, so she had to push it away. Murong Qing noticed her thoughts and quickly comforted her in a soft voice, "Miss Lu, since we got married on the same day, we are destined to be together. I became acquainted at first sight, so I gave you this bracelet. I never like to wear these things, so you can accept them with peace of mind." Lu Qing also smiled with difficulty and said, "Thank you, sister." At this moment, the rain also stopped, and the people outside immediately took action, urging them to set off. Murong Qing took the opportunity to quietly exchange ideas, giving his own head to Lu Qing, and then covering Lu Qing's head to himself. Ping'er walked in, looked at the bracelet and cap, without any doubt, and raised her hand to take Lu Qing over. What a close call. Two wedding procession left Suyan Street, one heading south and the other heading north. Murong Qing in the sedan chair knew that if the plan was feasible, Xing Xiuyan would not mistreat Lu Qingdu to the royal face. Marrying the third prince is in line with the heart of the Shangshu mansion. After 2 hours, Murong Qingkai was carried to the general's mansion. After getting off the sedan chair, I was helped by a maid to cross the fire basin, and then slowly stepped into the gate of the general's mansion, heading straight to the main hall. The auspicious time has arrived, bow down to heaven and earth. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Entering the Wolf's Nest Again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Entering the Wolf's Nest again. As soon as Murong Qing stood firm, the butler of the general's mansion shouted loudly. She had to be supported by a maid to perform the wedding ceremony. Erbai Gaotang. Husband and wife say goodbye. After 3 rounds of bowing, before Murong could straighten his waist, he heard the crowing of chickens. Thinking of what Ping Er said, I couldn't help but frown. She bowed to a chicken together. But she was already aware of this matter, even though she was dissatisfied in her heart, she had to endure it. But it seems that General Pei is seriously ill, otherwise how could a chicken have paid his respects for him? Later, Murong Qing was helped into General Pei's bedroom by a maid. The banquet outside is lively and lively. Murong Qing followed the cover and looked at his feet. Seeing a maid beside him, he had to endure and keep covering the cover. It wasn't until a few hours later, at night, that the door to the room was pushed open. The maid bowed to the person at the door and then retreated. The intermittent coughing made Murong Qing, who had just begun to feel sleepy, completely lose his drowsiness. Listening to the sound of the door closing, Murong Qing raised his hand and lifted his own hood. I saw the newcomer with a uniform and long body shape, dressed in joyful attire, with ink-like hair hanging down, sword-like starry eyebrows, eyes like stars but without any divine color, fair skin like paper, and weak footsteps accompanied by coughing, as if his life was not long. What a sick young master who descended to earth like an immortal. But fortunately, it wasn't carrying a big rooster in. His sword eyebrows first froze and then slightly raised, his gaze slightly frivolous. Madam, with such a beautiful and charming appearance, peach shy and apricot yielding, that painter didn't draw any charm from Madam. Damn it. Murong Qingxiu frowned and immediately shouted, Who are you? The man approached with a smile on his face and stopped in front of Murong Qing. His knuckled index finger lifted her chin slightly and said, General Pei Mo, your husband. At this moment, Pei Mo's eyes were clear and bright, with hidden joy. Murong Qing couldn't have thought that General Pei had just taken action, and in a moment of panic, he quickly knocked off Pei Mo's hand. Hurriedly said, Pei Mo General Pei. I am. Before Murong Qing could finish speaking, Pei Mo covered Murong Qing's mouth and said with a smile, A quarter of a spring night is worth 1,000 gold. Madam, don't say anything. Murong Qing became anxious and pushed away Pei Mo, saying, I am Murong Qing from the Marquis's mansion in the south, not Miss Lu San. It must be the wedding procession that picked up the wrong bride at the Bodhisattva temple. Murong Qing also wanted to explain, but found Pei Mo standing with a mysterious smile on his face. Instantly understanding, he asked, Did you recognize me from the beginning? The southern princess, one of the few bold and straightforward women in the 4 realms, naturally met. Pei Mo was appointed as the Grand General of Xianggong in the past because of the Battle of Beijing. In that battle, the elder brother still led troops to reinforce, but after the war, their southern Marquis's mansion and Pei Mo no longer had any interaction. The jurisdiction they are responsible for is divided into one south and one north, and even reporting military affairs to Jingzhou rarely intersects. It was her first time coming to Jingzhou, and it was unexpected that Pei Mo knew her. Murong Qing said with a slight anger, Since you know each other, why are you still bullying me like this? Murong Qing interrupted Pei Mo, who was about to accept, and said, Forget it. General Pei will send someone to take me to the residence of the third prince, and then bring back Miss Lu San. Pei Mo's face was calm and his hands were on his back. He looked at Murong's plump expression and said calmly, "It's my general who was reckless. Princess, don't be angry. I'll send someone to send you back now to avoid the third prince waiting in a hurry. Stop speaking." A series of coughs, as if the lungs were about to cough out. Slowly walk towards the door. Murong Qing calculated that he would only be carried to the general's mansion at this point and could never be sent back to Xing Shiyan's side. Otherwise, considering the pros and cons of Xing Shiyan, she will definitely be left behind, and even take this opportunity to make the Southern Marquis's mansion apologize for this shout out loud. Wait a minute. The startled sound made Pei Mo bump into the chair at his feet, his body unstable, and he was about to fall to the ground. Murong Qing looked at it and immediately lifted up, grabbing Pei Mo's arm. Relying on Pei Mo's weak body, if she falls down, she will at least lose half of her life. If she falls to death, Murong Qing will be even more speechless. Not only did she marry her husband wrongly, but she also killed her husband in the bridal chamber. What kind of craft, broom stars, and other reputations can't escape? Unexpectedly, Pei Mo, who seemed to collapse in the wind, was as heavy as a pig. Murong Qing's strength in one hand was surprisingly insufficient. With a forceful pull, he quickly embraced Pei Mo with both hands. For eyes facing each other. Mutual breathing is within reach. Murong Qing looked at the person in his arms and saw his face, which was somewhat pale and rosy, with starry eyes that were deep and bright. For a moment, I felt that General Pei was still pitiful and seductive. At the same time, I feel my cheeks burning hot. Quickly let go of Pei Mo. Xianggong sat back on the edge of the bed. She didn't see Pei Mo's cunning smile as if he had succeeded in his scheme. The two of them spoke at the same time, why not, as if trying to break the strange ambiguous atmosphere. "Princess, please speak first." Murong Qing slowly spoke up and said, "General Pei, although this was an accident, I was still brought to the general's mansion. Even if I were sent back, the third prince would never keep me. Who else dares to marry me in the future? Why not? Why not make the right decision? It should be a marriage bestowed by heaven." Pei Mo asked, "What does princess mean?" Murong Qing bit his lower lip tightly and said with a firm heart, "Since I have been carried here, there is no reason for me to be carried out again. Besides, General Pei and I are both generals. Why don't you leave me behind so that we can become opposite-sex brothers in the future? I can also help you find some pretty concubines to satisfy you." Pei Mo looked up and said, "General, I don't take concubines." "Ah." Murong Qing opened his mouth in shock and only then said after realizing it, "Then let's wait until you find your beloved woman and let's separate. I won't hold on to the position of general's wife and not leave. If you don't take concubines, then there is only the position of general's wife. But for now, she really has to sit down. She can only leave when Pei Mo meets his beloved in the future. Does the princess mean to stay? Just stay for now." The two of them looked at each other with four eyes, and Pei Mo chuckled lightly, "Since it was requested by the southern princess, I will comply. But there is only one thing that needs to be decided by me." Murong Qingxin breathed a sigh of relief, not to mention one, even if it was in her 30s or 50s. As if afraid that Pei Mo would retract, she quickly said, "General, please speak up. In the future, the general has the final say in the matter of getting together and leaving." Pei Mo raised his lip and slightly lowered his head to approach. "Madam doesn't count." Murong Qing was stunned, but he felt that such a request seemed right. Looking at the general's weak appearance, he couldn't say how long he could live. However, for some unknown reason, she felt like she had just emerged from the tiger's mouth and then entered the wolf's den. But at this moment, there was no need to worry too much. Murong Qing nodded and said, "It's a deal." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Joyful Beauty. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Joyful beauty in front of the mahogany table, the two stood in opposition, each holding a glass of wine. Murong Qing looked at the jiaobei wine in his hand and asked cautiously, "Just take what you need, don't you need to drink this jiaobei wine?" It was clearly a transaction, but Pei Mo forced her to drink a toast. "Make it look like a real couple." Pei Mo's eyes sank and he said, "We haven't separated yet. You are my Pei Mo's wife. Drinking a toast is considered a courtesy." Upon hearing this, Murong Qing stopped talking and lowered his head to take a sip. Then the two exchanged glasses and drank the remaining wine. Pei Mo lightly placed his wine glass and watched as his cheeks turned red from the wine, and he wore this robe, as if a clear wave of hibiscus had emerged. He was a bit confused for a moment. Murong Qing played with the wine glass in his hand and said, "General Pei, this is a courtesy, I'm a bit tired." The meaning of chasing guests is self-evident. Looking back, Pei Mo said with a slight smile, "Madam, it's getting late. Come and serve my husband's bridal chamber." Murong Qing was surprised and said, "We are opposite-sex brothers. I thought you were my brother, but you actually wanted to sleep with me." Emotions are like brothers, they are also husband and wife. Murong frowned and looked at Pei Mo's slightly frail body, his eyes full of contempt. "I'm just behind the general. Crush the wine glass in your hand and sprinkle it on the table." Pei Mo looked embarrassed and coughed repeatedly, cough cough. "Let's skip the bridal chamber." "Skip. I feel sweat in my palms, it's a bit difficult to straighten out." Continuing, he said, "Since Madam has arrived at the general's mansion, I should order someone to prepare the account books and land deeds of the mansion, and hand them over to you tomorrow. Then, I will leave the general's mansion to Madam to take care of." Murong Qingtang wanted to refuse, but when she thought about their current trading relationship, at least on the surface, she became the general's wife from then on. It's reasonable to hand over these account books and land deeds to her. She nodded in response and said, "Thank you, General." Pei Mo spoke brightly, "Since you are the general's wife, you should call the prime minister." After speaking, he walked towards the door with his hands behind his back. Murong Qing's eyes were filled with shock, and his cheeks were burning fiercely. Xianggong. She has never called out to anyone else. Even Xing Xiuyan had never summoned him like this before. But anyway, this calamity is finally over, but there should be other troubles soon. After all, Xing Xiuyan cannot give up here. He will definitely come to ask for someone in the general's mansion. Pei Mo came out of the bedroom and headed straight to the study. Standing at the entrance of the study was his guard Lu Shen, who followed Pei Mo closely into the study. Lu Shen saw Pei Mo sitting down and arched his hand to report, "General, the Southern Lu Flying Dove has sent a message saying that the consort carrying the third prince's mansion is Miss Lu San, and the one brought by the general's mansion should be the eldest lady of the Southern Marquis's mansion. The third prince has already arrived at the general's mansion, so please give him an idea on this matter." "What's your idea?" Pei Mo squinted and asked in response. Lu Shen was taken aback and answered as expected, "Of course, I have replaced the two young ladies who got on the wrong sedan chair." "Humph." Pei Mo sneered coldly. With a solemn demeanor, there is no sign of being seriously ill. He picked up the Xianggong sword standing by his desk, slowly drew it out, and lightly tapped it with his index finger. But suddenly the sword blade turned and pointed directly at Lu Shen, asking him with a smile, "When will there be a reason to send back the people who have been carried into my general's mansion? Lu Shen, please tell this general how to handle this matter." Lu Shen was so frightened that he couldn't even breathe. He was afraid of Pei Mo's reckless behavior when he started, and also afraid of Pei Mo's uncontrollable anger. But he was even more afraid of Pei Mo's threatening look with a smile on his face. Just like the arrival of the Prince of Yen, he laughed so hard that his hair stood on end. What the general said is, "Then don't carry it back. In the future, the eldest lady of the Southern Marquis's mansion will be the wife of the general's mansion." Lu Shen flattered with a smile, showing a hint of flattery. Pei Mo nodded with satisfaction and withdrew his sword from its sheath. General, I want to reconcile with Madam. When the third prince arrives, he will be blocked outside the door. If he can't stop me, there's no need to keep your head, he said. He put away the Xianggong sword, opened the drawer again, and slowly took out the white jade longevity lock inside. Seeing this thing, my expression was surprisingly gentle. Lu Shen suddenly understood what Pei Mo meant and arched his hand with a smile, saying, I will definitely stop the third prince. Congratulations to the general for having a beautiful woman. After speaking, he quickly retreated. Pei Mo lightly stroked the long life lock with his fingertips, and a faint smile hung on his face. Reverse the long life lock and engrave a character on the back. Qing. Day and night alternate, until the sun rises above the pole. The sleeping rooms of the general and his wife are still tightly closed. But no one dares to call the door. This is so urgent that Xing Xiuyan waited at the door for 2 hours. This palace is the third prince of the Das-Hun dynasty. You should immediately let Pei Mo come out to see this palace. Go and report it quickly. Xing Xiuyan's past warmth was as gentle as jade, but now it no longer exists. Especially when I think that Murong Qing and Pei Mo are still asleep, I feel anxious. Countless calculations, but I never expected such a ridiculous thing to happen. I still remember when I lifted the cover, I felt like the sky and the earth were falling apart, like thunder. I finally got married to the eldest lady of the Southern Marquis mansion, but in the end, she became the third young lady of the Lu family. Even a commoner. How did he accept this? Xing Xiuyan watched as Lu Shen, who was still guarding the door, remained motionless. His angry eyes were crimson, and he was about to break in with his feet. Your Highness's unauthorized intrusion into the general's mansion, if it disturbs General Pei's roundhouse, a memorial will be presented to your majesty. The third prince will know the consequences. Lu Shen raised his hand and stopped Xing Xiuyan. Xing Xiuyan looked at him incredulously and said, How dare you threaten me? This palace is the third prince of the great Shun dynasty, and you are just Pei Mo's guard. Even this palace dares to stop you and seek death. Even though he was so angry, he did not order his subordinates to draw their swords and break into the general's mansion. Just because Pei Mo's identity is complex, let alone him. Even if Father Emperor came, he would not easily confront Pei Mo. But it's just a verbal addiction. Lu Shen withdrew his hand, arched his hand and lowered his head, saying, Your Highness, I have made amends. I have only been ordered to do so. Acting on orders. Haha. Xing Xiuyan was furious and paced back and forth at the entrance of the general's mansion, saying, The queen of this palace has been sent to the general's mansion. Can you tell me what order Pei Mo gave? Quickly ask him to hand over Qing'er, otherwise this palace will immediately report to the emperor. Why do the third prince need to report to his majesty? He also needs to come to our general's mansion and make a loud noise. A familiar voice sounded, and Lu Shen turned around to look. Pei Mo yawned as he walked out, his face full of fatigue. Lu Shen, how could you stop the third prince from entering the mansion? It's just nonsense. Go to the backyard and collect the 20 great board. Lu Shen turned his back to Xing Xiuyan, but the corners of his mouth were raised and he smiled in response, yes. After speaking, he headed towards the backyard, but headed straight for the small kitchen. Pei Mo walked up to Xing Xiuyan and arched his hand, saying, Cough, cough. Last night's bridal chamber was decorated with candles. I woke up late today, and I hope your highness can forgive me. Stop speaking, with one hand behind the back and the other half clenched with a hollow fist, and cough a few times under the vermilion lips. It really looks like a serious illness. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Truly Round the House. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Truly round the house. Xing Ziwanro, no matter how calm he was, widened his eyes and said, The bridal chamber. I thought Lu Shen was probably trying to stop him, so he deliberately lied about the matter of the house. But at this moment, when Pei Mo talked about the bridal chamber, he found it difficult to calm down and clenched his hands tightly in anger. General Pei didn't see that the person sent was not Miss Lu San. Upon hearing this, Pei Mo pretended to be surprised and said, "Isn't it Miss Lu San? You? Why don't you even know Miss Lu San? Before the wedding, you clearly saw that portrait of Miss Lu San." Xing Xiuyan stuttered angrily. Looking at Pei Mo's ignorant appearance, he was stunned and held his breath in his chest, making him feel uncomfortable. What kind of thing is this? Even if Pei Mo did not recognize the one sent to him as Murong Qing, Murong Qing should have known that something had gone wrong when he saw Pei Mo. He hurriedly asked, "Didn't Qing'er refuse you last night?" Pei Mo lowered his eyes and slightly tilted his head in an imperceptible manner, looking at the corner. With a light breeze, he said, after putting out the candle, "We have just completed the roundhouse. Why refuse?" Pop. Xing Xiuyan raised his hand and patted his forehead, feeling that the sky was about to collapse. By chance, Pei Mo and Murong Qing truly reconciled. He put in a lot of effort to marry Murong Qing as the official wife, and now this situation teaches him how to accept it. But when he thought of the Murong family, Xing Xiuyan's eyes sank. "No problem. Our palace did not touch Miss Lu San. General Pei handed over Qing'er to our palace first, and our palace immediately sent someone to bring Miss Lu San. This matter will not be discussed with the general, it should have never happened," Xing Xiuyan said with magnanimity. "If it's a wrong marriage, it's a heavenly gift and there's no need to exchange it." Pei Mo calmly refused, with his empty fist pressed against his vermilion lips and a few soft coughs. "I'm not feeling well, I need to go back and rest." "Your Highness, please be light." Xing Xiuyan wanted to speak again, but Pei Mo had already turned around and entered the mansion. Although Xing Xiuyan's words made him light, he quietly ordered, "Close the door." The servant at the door looked at Xing Xiuyan's gloomy expression, but had to obey Pei Mo's orders. The vermilion door slowly closed. Xing Xiuyan watched Pei Mo's back gradually shrink and gritted his teeth in anger, saying, "This palace will definitely reclaim Qing'er. Even if Murong Qing has lost himself to Pei Mo, he doesn't care as long as he can recapture Murong Qing. Moreover, for him, this may not necessarily be an opportunity within the general's mansion." Pei Mo walked straight to the corner and saw the beautiful figure intending to leave first. He then strode to follow and said, "The third prince has a deep affection for his wife. Even if my husband's words have already been fulfilled, he wants to take you back." Behind his hands, he lowered his gaze to look at Murong Qing walking beside him, with a smile on his lips. "Madam, do you really not want to be the legitimate wife of the third prince, but rather the general's wife of the husband?" Murong Qing suddenly stopped and Xianggong glared at him, saying, "General, you know what you want to do. What do you want to do?" The two of them looked at each other with a smile and walked towards the dining hall in sync. Lu Shan had already ordered the breakfast to be prepared. When Pei Mo and Murong Qing arrived, he bowed his head, saying, "I congratulate the general and madam on their great marriage. May the general and madam work hand in hand to have a fair head and give birth to a noble son at an early age. All right, there's no need to say any more auspicious words. Hurry up and prepare the carriage. After dinner, you'll be entering the palace." Pei Mo sat down, and the maid at the door came forward to serve her food. Lu Shan didn't ask much about the reason, so he hurriedly went to handle the matter. Murong Qing looked at Lu Shan's back and asked in confusion, "Who is this person?" "It's my subordinate Lu Shan. If you have anything to do in the future, instruct him to do it. Trust it." Pei Mo waved his hand at the maid, and she wisely retreated. Murong Qing thought he had something to say, so he waited quietly. However, it was not until Pei Mo spoke up. "How did you keep the maid away? Is there something to say?" Murong Qing was puzzled. Pei Mo put some vegetables in her bowl and said, "Madam, you've just entered the general's mansion. I'm afraid there might be maids around, so you're not comfortable eating. Murong Qing was taken aback, but he didn't expect him to be so subtle and considerate, even able to think of such details. However, she is also not accustomed to having others present during meals, unless it is Pinger. An hour later, Your Majesty's edict came, ordering Pei-mo and Murong Qing to enter the palace together. At that time, the two of them were already at the entrance of the general's mansion. Upon hearing Pei-mo's instructions, he asked Murong Qing to get on the carriage first. He then turned to look at Lu Shen and said, "The general's mansion rewards everyone with 20 taels of silver, only that it is a reward from his wife." Lu Shen arched his hand and replied, "Yes." Taking a carriage all the way to the palace, Murong Qing began to ferment emotions. Pei-mo only watched her from the side, with a hidden affection in his eyes. Upon entering the palace, he was taken by Duke Qin all the way to Deshuan Palace. This is the residence of Empress Xian, the mother consort of the third prince. It is obvious that she was brought here directly to solve the issue of marrying incorrectly. As soon as Murong Qing stepped into the Deshuan Palace, he fiercely pinched his arm. At such a critical moment, even if you say anything, you have to squeeze out 2 tears. Unfortunately, she doesn't like to cry, even though she suffered such a great injustice in her previous life, she never shed tears. Perhaps because it was really painful, her eyes turned red and tears flickered. Looking back on the past life, tears fell like pearls one by one. Xing Xiuyan. I will avenge my past life 100 times in this life. Pei-mo saw the situation. Amazed by it. Even if I knew she was acting, I felt heartbroken watching her. I sighed in my heart, this acting is really amazing. A hint of heartache led to the illness, and Pei-mo coughed heavily. Cough, cough. The 5 organs and 6 viscera all have to cough up, and anyone who looks at them looks like they are critically ill and have a short life. The two followed Duke Qin into the palace of Deshuan. At the moment of entering the hall, Pei-mo coughed softly, and Murong Qing raised his hand in a gesture that pretended to touch the corner of his eyes, showing a perfect understanding. The two of them walked up to the front of the emperor and saluted, saying, "See your majesty." The emperor raised his hand slightly and said, "Flat, give me a seat." Upon hearing this, Pei-mo and Murong Qingkai stood up and straightened their backs. Pei-mo raised his hand to help Murong Qing sit down, but was pushed away by Murong Qing. Like a mischievous little daughter. Lol. Even the emperor was stunned for a moment, as if he was very dissatisfied with the wrong marriage. Otherwise, how could he lose his dignity in front of the hall? Murong Qing glanced at the people around him, and besides Empress Xian and Xing Xiuyan, even Lu Qing was brought along. She deliberately sat by Lu Qing's side, and Pei-mo followed closely as she sat down. Upon seeing this, Xing Xiuyan quickly stood up and arched his hand, saying, "Father, since General Pei and Qinger have both come, I still ask Father to be in charge of this matter for my son. The wrong marriage is actually a matter of fate, and my son only requests Qinger to return to his side. There is nothing else I can ask for." After speaking, he threw his black robe and knelt down. The emperor frowned and turned to look at Pei-mo. "How do you think I should handle this matter properly?" Pei-mo coughed a few more times and slowly got up. "Iching doesn't need to get up and sit down to answer," the emperor quickly spoke. Upon hearing this, Pei-mo sat down impolitely and bowed to the emperor, saying, "I thought this was a divine gift. Yesterday was the auspicious day chosen by the imperial censorate, and it was still clear sky for a moment. How could we set off and continue to rain heavily? If it weren't for the intention of the heavens to bestow a divine gift, how could it be like this?" End of this chapter. Chapter 7. My concubine would rather die. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. My concubine would rather die, a bunch of nonsense. Xing Xiuyan glared angrily at Pei-mo. It's just that he made a mistake in the sedan chair at the Bodhisattva temple. How could it become a divine gift? Perhaps it was because of his wrong marriage that he was so angry that he spoke so harshly to Pei Mo in front of the emperor. Completely oblivious, the emperor's expression was already displeased. Cough. Cough. Pei Mo clenched his empty fist and lowered his eyes, coughing softly. What the third prince said is absolutely right. It's because I'm too talkative. Since that's the case, then I'll follow your majesty's arrangements. Taking a step back as a way forward, with a particularly humble attitude and considering the overall situation. Even gave Xing Xiuyan face. Xing Xiuyan thought he had agreed and quickly bowed his hand, saying, "Father, I only have Qing'er in my heart. I will marry her in this life, and I hope father can fulfill it." The words fell and he knocked his head to the ground, but he didn't even notice that when the emperor looked at him, the Sichuan character pattern remained tightly furrowed. Although it is a sign of love, such words are more like forcing the emperor to lean towards him. Even Empress Xian couldn't help but frown upon hearing this. "If you are really anxious, you will be chaotic." She stood up, bowed her knees, and said in a slow voice, "Your Majesty, I believe that even if this is a heavenly gift, it still needs to be decided by the two girls. After all, it is a marriage, and we can only do it if you please me." In just a few words, he handed over the decision-making power to Murong Qing and Lu Qing. The emperor nodded with satisfaction and said, "Empress Ai's words are reasonable. This matter still needs to be decided by Princess Qinglan and Miss Lu San." When Murong Qing heard about Princess Qinglan, she couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. It was rare for anyone to call her this way. Although she had already been granted the title of princess, others always called her Miss Murong, and even she almost forgot that she was Princess Qinglan. After all, the title of the Murong family is more practical than that of a princess. Murong Qing and Lu Qing stood up at the same time and knelt down side by side. Xing Xiuyan stood up slightly and looked at Murong Qing with hopeful eyes. As long as Murong Qing said he was willing to change it back, Pei Mo would not have the final say in this matter. "Even if it's the emperor, we can't beat the Mandarin ducks with a stick." Murong Qing lowered her head and pretended to wipe away her tears, speaking softly, "Your Majesty, Qing'er has been taught by her father and brother since childhood. I still remember that his father once said that everyone in the Southern Marquis mansion needs to understand the overall situation and consider the overall situation, and should not do anything that would cause trouble to your Majesty. Qing'er also knows that the third prince has a broad mind and will definitely not care about Qing'er, who is no longer innocent." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I spoke, hiding all kinds of grievances within. But in such a situation, if it were to be changed back, what would be the difference between a woman marrying two husbands? Such a thing that would damage the dignity of the royal family, Qing'er really can't do it. Xing Xiuyan widened his eyes in shock and said, "Qing'er, you." She didn't want to exchange it back. But in this way, how can he win over the strong army of the Southern Marquis mansion? No. Qing'er, we love each other and have already promised each other for life. I only want you in this life. Xing Xiuyan's words were even more pleasant than those of a performer. If it were Murong Qing from the previous life, she would have been moved to tears long ago. But at this moment, she wished she could step forward and slap him. Just because later on, he was clearly 3,000 beautiful women in the harem. At this moment, Murong Qing could only pretend to be reluctant and bow down, saying, "Qing'er, thank you very much for the kindness of the third prince. But now, for the sake of the royal face, the Southern Marquis mansion, and your face, Qing'er has only let down the third prince's sincerity. Please forgive the third prince." Word by word, sentence by sentence, logically speaking. Every sentence is closely related to understanding the general situation and considering the overall situation. The emperor nodded in satisfaction and said, "I have long heard that the family education in the Southern Marquis mansion is quite strict. However, I never expected that your father, the only daughter, would be so strict in his discipline. He even taught you to consider the overall situation so well. It's rare." He casually raised the corner of his lips, and his eyes were full of appreciation. He slightly raised his hand. Flat, give me a seat. Murong said softly, Your Majesty, thank you. After speaking, he slowly got up and walked to Pei Mo's side. The two of them exchanged a glance, and Murong Qing playfully blinked. Pei Mo casually raised his lips and resumed his normal demeanor, saying in a deep voice, Your Majesty, I apologize for speaking bluntly. The Southern Realm has always had a good face, and if the news of the princess marrying two husbands spreads to the Southern Realm soldiers will surely know. This is truly a great shame for the entire Southern Realm. Please think twice, Your Majesty. He mentioned the soldiers in the southern region, and the Emperor's expression sank, knowing that it was indeed as he said. The soldiers in the Southern Realm are already the most suffering among the four realms, but they are also the strongest overall strength among the four realms. Although a wrong marriage may be accidental, if it concerns the reputation of the soldiers in the southern region and the entire southern region, one must handle it with caution. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. The Emperor's expression was shrouded in secrecy. Your words are absolutely true. I must not let the soldiers of the southern region chill their hearts. Lu Qing has rarely left the mansion, and has never seen such a scene before. However, upon hearing Pei Mo's analysis, she was frightened and quickly said, I will listen to Your Majesty's decision. Sheng Xiuyan glanced at Lu Qing and was very dissatisfied with her answer. After all, he was the only one who insisted on replacing the person. He must hold on to the power of the Southern Realm no matter what. He gritted his teeth and arched his hand with a horizontal heart, saying, Father, my son's heart towards Qing'er can be observed by the sun and moon. If Qing'er marries someone else, my son, I would rather die. Bang! The Emperor suddenly patted the table, his expression instantly darkened, and he sternly shouted, Nonsense! The few people who were originally sitting in the hall also got up and knelt down one after another. Palace maids and eunuchs knelt down one after another. The anger of the Emperor makes it difficult for all beings to be at ease. Your Majesty, calm down, everyone shouted in unison. Sheng Xiuyan also lowered his head in fear, afraid to say another word. The crown prince of the great Shun dynasty, for the sake of a woman, spoke such heinous and immoral words, even without any understanding. How could I have such a foolish emperor like you? The Emperor frowned his head and stood up with his hands behind his back. The Emperor's aura was so overwhelming that he couldn't breathe. When looking at Sheng Xiuyan, there was even a hint of disgust in his eyes. Qing'er still knows how to consider the overall situation. You were born into the imperial family and are a 7-foot-tall man. You don't think about how to benefit the people, it's all right. Now, for the sake of love, you are seeking death and life. You. Perhaps due to his impatience, he didn't come up in one breath and stumbled back an inch, raising his hand to cover his chest. Your Majesty. Empress Xian knelt at the front and quickly got up to help him sit down. She helped him follow her anger and said, Send the imperial physician. Hurry up. Xianggong at the door hurriedly started searching for the imperial physician. Empress Xian looked at Sheng Xiuyan, who was kneeling on the ground. After all, she was her own son and always had to grit her head to speak for him. Your Majesty, calm down. Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, has been using such deep emotions to speak such nonsense. It is my concubine's teaching that is not good, and I will definitely teach Your Majesty strictly in the future, and I will never make Your Majesty angry again. The Emperor calmed down slightly, and his face also improved a bit. Looking at the few people kneeling in the hall, Chuanziwen furrowed again. Based solely on today's events, it can be seen that Murong Qing and Pei Mo are both knowledgeable and concerned about the overall situation. Although Lu Qing is a jade from a small family, he is not as imposing as Murong Qing, but also sensible. Pianqing Xiuyan is a person who doesn't understand the overall situation and even uses death to force him. The more the emperor thought about it, the more angry he became. He said coldly, "It's better to marry wrongly or to have a good fate bestowed upon you by heaven. In the future, Miss Lu San will be your legitimate consort. If you dare to say any more nonsense about life and death, I don't think you, the prince, need to do it." Sheng Xiuyan's forehead dripped with cold sweat in fear, and his throat trembled as he responded, "Yes, yes." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Giving Military Talismans. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Giving military talismans. Upon seeing Duke Qin bringing the imperial physician, the emperor spoke in a slow voice and said, "Go to the Lu Shangshu mansion and deliver my edict. Miss Lu Qing is virtuous, with a orchid heart and outstanding appearance, and has been blessed by heaven. I am very pleased and hereby betroth her to the third prince as the queen. The etiquette has been completed, and she will be the queen from then on." Upon hearing this, Duke Qin hurried forward and bent down to answer, "Yes." The emperor looked at Murong Qing and Pmo kneeling on the side, his eyes shrouded in mystery, and said, "Princess Qinglan and the general of Xianggong have a good relationship bestowed by heaven. Special gifts include 10,000 taels of gold, 1,000 pieces of silk and satin, and a pair of jade rui." Pmo and Murong Qing both said, "Thank you, your majesty, for your kindness." The emperor looked at the few people in the palace and couldn't help but think of what Pmo had said about the soldiers in the southern region. After pondering for a moment, he spoke slowly and said, "The women waiting for education in the southern region are well prepared and trained. They have been stationed in the southern region for many years, ensuring the health and well-being of the people. They have won my heart deeply. They have been specially appointed as the king of the southern region, in charge of the southern region's troops and horses, bestowed with military symbols, and the crown prince will inherit the title. 3 days later, a banquet will be held in the imperial dining room, and I will congratulate the king of the southern region." As soon as these words were spoken, the kneeling crowd all widened their eyes in surprise. Southern Realm King, this is the only prince among the 4 realms. The rest are all marquises. Even allowing the king of the southern realm to control the troops and horses of the southern realm and bestowing them with talismans, unprecedented. Even Murong Qing never imagined that his majesty would suddenly receive such a large reward, but she had no joy and only felt uneasy. Since ancient times, emperors have been wary of wielding excessive power in the hands of those who wield weapons, but now they also bestow military symbols, which is truly unpredictable. Moreover, now that the southern part of the 4 realms is en theft as a prince, it will surely attract dissatisfaction from the other 3 realms. But the emperor's words of 9 tripods have already been spoken, so there is no reason to retract them. Just as she was thinking about it, Empress Xian spoke cautiously and said, "Your Majesty, the king of the southern realm. Is this reward too much? Why don't we give some silver instead?" After all, Murong Qing and Sheng Xiuyan are no longer destined, and receiving this award in the southern region is not something that all officials would like to see. Of course, it's not something their mother and son are happy to see. The emperor immediately lowered his face and said, "The emperor's words are 9 tripods, how can there be a reason to retract them?" Empress Xian quickly knelt down and panicked, saying, "It was my concubine who made a mistake. Your Majesty forgives me." The hall fell silent for a moment, completely silent. "Let's all get up." The emperor suddenly spoke up and then stood up to help Murong Qing and Pmo, with a smile on his face. "The princess and the general of Xianggong are really talented and beautiful, no wonder they have a good relationship from heaven. But when such things happen, I'm afraid the southern prince will also be worried. The princess must appease the old prince well." Murong Qing bent his knees and said, "Yes." The matter of wrong marriage was handled properly, and the emperor did not stay for long. He left the Deshuan palace, and Duke Qin quickly followed suit. He also ordered people to go to the Lu Shangshu mansion and the Southern Marquis mansion to deliver oral orders. After the emperor left, Murong Qing, Pmo, and Lu Qin also left together. Only Xing Xiuyan was left in the palace by Empress Xian. Bang! 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 After holding back the eunuchs of the Dushuan palace, Xing Xiuyan smashed all the porcelain cups on the table to the ground. Bitch! This bitch! Fortunately, I have been pleasing her for so many days, and she is unwilling to exchange it for me today. Bitch! KMO surprisingly, he is trying to steal women from this palace and is seeking death. You're just a courtier, this palace is a prince. The third prince of the Dushan dynasty. Xing Xiuyan's anger was uncontrollable, smashing things and cursing in his mouth. Empress Xian did not stop her, as if she had already taken Xing Xiuyan's temperament for granted. Until he finished getting angry and sat down, Empress Xian slowly said, "Your Majesty, you are so reckless today. Even though you know your Majesty is already unhappy, how can you force a replacement?" Upon hearing this, Xing Xiuyan clenched his hands on the armrests of the chair, his veins bulging on the back of his hands, and his ink eyes were full of malice. Others don't know why, don't mother understand my subordinates. The soldiers in the southern realm are strong, and he is the strongest among the 4 realms. If my subordinates can win over the southern realm king, they can fight against the second prince in the future. Thinking about today not only failing to replace Murong Qing, but also causing Longyan to be furious, I feel even more annoyed. Father is really confused, he didn't even help his courtiers. How could he comply with Pei Mo's wishes? He even promoted the southern realm king. Xing Xiuyan gritted his teeth in frustration, especially thinking that the emperor would scold him in front of these people. It really makes him lose face. Empress Xian furrowed her brows and said, "Your Majesty, you must not speak nonsense. You can say these words here with the Empress Dowager. If you leave, you must not say a word more." Xing Xiuyan took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed his anger, saying in a low voice, "I understand. But the thought of missing the support of the southern marquis' mansion made me worried." The military forces of the Dashun dynasty were mostly located in Jingzhou and the 3 regions of East, South, and North. Although there are troops and horses in the western region, they are very few, and the focus here is on merchants and farmland. He is not willing to mobilize the troops in Jingzhou, let alone have the courage. Dongjing is also the empress's family, so in the future, she will naturally follow the instructions of the second prince. The rest are the southern and northern regions. The northern territory was once under the jurisdiction of the Pei family. Although the northern territory marquis is no longer part of the Pei family, it was also cultivated by the Pei family and naturally served under Pei Mo. As for Pei Mo, there's no need to think about it. At a young age, he was appointed as the Grand General of the Zhenghua army, which made him proud. Now that this matter has happened again, it is not something he can persuade. After such a calculation, only the southern border remains. Xing Xiuyan squinted his eyes and said, "No way. Murong Qing, I cannot give up, especially in the southern region." Although he didn't like Murong Qing, he even detested her carefree nature and didn't think she had the gentle and shy appearance of a daughter's family. There's no other way, we can only start from her. She is truly the queen's son, knowing that she cannot give up on this southern territory. Empress Xian stood up and brought the tea beside her to put down, saying with a smile, "In the eyes of Empress Mother, Murong Qing only cared about her face and didn't want to change it back. In fact, she still has feelings for you. With such intelligence, the emperor should know what to do to make her take her heart and soul into you." Hua Luo slowly sat on the chair beside Xing Xiuyan. If it weren't for the fact that she was the daughter of the Southern Kingdom king, the Queen Mother wouldn't want her to marry you as the main wife. Moreover, now that she is not innocent, how can she deserve the emperor's son? It's better not to exchange it, as it saves the emperor's body from getting dirty. Xing Xiuyan took a sip of tea and nodded, "That's true. My son is only concerned about her identity. She's just a woman who has lost her body. How could my son want her? However, I never expected that Pei Mo's body could also perform the rites of Duke Zhou. It looks like it won't last long. Suddenly, a plan came to his mind, and after careful consideration, he quickly got up. After the mother's death, the courtiers retired first and went to the palace another day to pay their respects. Empress Xian saw a smile on his face and guessed that she had come up with a solution. She smiled and took off a hairpin from her head, saying, "Your Majesty, since the Empress has been appointed, although Miss Lu San has a humble status, she still needs to be coaxed to avoid causing trouble. Moreover, this can be considered as winning over Lu Shangshu. It's better to have one more person than one less." She placed the hairpin in Xing Shuyan's hand. "This hairpin was a reward from your Majesty a few days ago, let's give it to her. Xing Shuyan is also a smart person who knows how to do it." "I understand." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Summoning Xianggong to listen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Summoning Xianggong to listen. After leaving Dushuan Palace, there is an ochre-red corridor leading directly to the entrance of the palace. Murong Qing and Lu Qing walked side by side in front, while Pei Mo deliberately walked slowly behind them, occasionally coughing softly. Looking at the corridor, Murong Qing couldn't help but think of the previous life. The palace trapped her like a cage, enduring immense agony every day. But she will never be trapped in this palace again in this lifetime. As for whether Lu Qing will be in the palace in the future, it depends on whether Xing Shuyan still has the ability to sit on the throne. She turned her head to look at Lu Qing with a worried expression on her face and comforted her softly, "My sister doesn't need to be too sad. This is the end of the matter, and in the future, my sister will be the legitimate wife of the third prince. Be cautious in all things." Lu Qing nodded and lowered her head, saying, "My younger sister always feels sorry for her sister. If it weren't for marrying wrongly, now my sister would definitely be the legitimate wife of the third prince. How could someone with such a low status like me become the third princess?" After speaking, he turned to look at Pei Mo. Pei Mo happened to cough, and Lu Qing immediately frowned and whispered, "General Pei's body, I don't know if there is a medicine doctor. If my sister is really widowed because of me, she will have a difficult life. It's better for my younger sister to invite the third prince to find some famous doctors to treat General Pei another day, so that my sister doesn't have to worry about being a widow." Lu Qing suddenly suggested, but suddenly changed his tone and said, "It's really not possible. We should also try to make my sister conceive children, so that being a widow in the future won't be too difficult." She mostly felt that this method was feasible, and when she said it, her eyes lit up. As if waiting for Murong Qing to respond, he was about to talk to Xing Shuyan about this matter, and at this moment, he looked at Murong Qing eagerly. "No, no, no, no." Murong Qing panicked and refused, looking back at Pei Mo with a dry smile. "I've been searching for famous doctors everywhere, and my sister will arrange it. My sister should take care of herself first. The two of them are just in a cooperative relationship, and it's not guaranteed that they will part ways one day. With this weak body, dying of illness and less trouble for their own planning." Upon hearing that Murong Qing wanted to arrange it himself, Lu Qing stopped talking. At the entrance of the palace, 2 carriages waited on either side. Upon seeing Murong Qing come out, Ping'er quickly stepped forward with a red eye and cried, "It's all my fault. I misunderstood the person. Miss, punish me, I have no complaints." Murong Qing took Ping'er's hand and said with a smile, "It's just a coincidence. How can I blame you? All right, wipe your tears quickly. If someone sees you crying at the entrance of this palace, they might think it's because of how I bullied you. Maybe because Ping'er has stayed by her side for many years, they are more like sisters than masters and servants." Upon hearing Murong Qing joke, Ping'er burst into tears and said, "Miss wouldn't bully Ping'er. It's best, Mississippi." Murong Qingchong pinched her face with indulgence and said, "Let's go back to the mansion." After speaking, he turned his head and bowed to Lu Qing. "3 princesses, goodbye. Lu Qing also returned a gift and then went in different directions. Murong Qing pulled Pinger towards the direction of the carriage and said as he walked, "In the future, Mo will be my husband, so we need to take him back to meet our father. But when we go to the general's mansion, you need to come with me, and I need you to take care of me personally. I'm not used to someone else." Pinger was delighted that Murong Qing wanted to bring her, but the thought of her young lady marrying Mo made her worried. She turned around and looked at Mo not far away, looking as if he was sick, but not quite like a dying person. "I don't know how long I can live. But now that the matter has come to an end, what qualifications can she have as a maid to speak more? Everything must be at the command of Murong Qing. Wherever Miss goes, Pinger will go." Arriving at the carriage, Pinger and the groom of the general's mansion sat outside, while Murong Qing and Mo sat inside the carriage. The carriage headed towards the direction of the Southern Marquis's mansion, and after sitting for a moment, Murong Qing couldn't help but ask, "General Pei, what are your opinions on today's matter?" Mo calmly replied, "Madam, you already have an answer in your heart, why bother asking again?" Murong Qing frowned and was very dissatisfied with Mo's answer. She felt something was wrong, but Mo was the Grand General of Xianggong, so she should have seen it more clearly than she did. "Unexpectedly, I received such an answer. It's so frustrating." Murong Qing no longer asked and turned his head to look elsewhere, with the words, "unhappy," almost written on his face. Mo looked at her profile, the corners of his mouth casually raised, and his gentle voice rang out, "It's just imperial power, so there's no need to worry too much. When the decree is issued, let the old prince. Let the father king push in the palace." Murong Qing was stunned and blinked a few times. Why does Mo's father king sound particularly awkward? She looked at Mo with a surplus of light and said, "You and I are just trading, so there's no need to change that title. If you don't change it, it will inevitably arouse suspicion." Mo took it for granted and narrowed his eyes. "Speaking of which, Madam hasn't changed her mind yet. It's better to call the Xianggong to listen first." As the words fell, I raised my eyebrows and waited for Murong Qing to change his tone. Murong Qing's ears turned red when he saw it, and his eyes turned elsewhere. He quickly changed his words and said, "Your Majesty's reward, why reject it? Besides, Empress Xian has never convinced your Majesty. How could my father, the king, reject this reward? Since ancient times, the rewards given by the emperor have often been intertwined with blessings and misfortunes. For generals, this is even more so. Today, not only were officials and nobles promoted, but military symbols were also bestowed. In the future, nearly 300,000 troops in the southern region will be deployed by the king of the southern region and his majesty." Such a large reward, she didn't feel it was a reward at all, but rather felt a chill in her spine. If something really happens, everyone in the Southern Marquis's mansion will be in danger. It's not difficult. Father only needs to say that he is old and wants to have a few years of leisure time, and the position will be inherited by the crown prince. The crown prince is still young and lacks experience, so military talismans cannot be handed over to him. Mo calmly gave a solution. Murong Qing's eyes lit up and he said, "Yes. This is really a good way. In this way, it will not harm the royal face, and the reward will be pushed back, killing two birds with one stone. Father can even enjoy his old age peacefully, without having to work hard and train soldiers every day at such an old age." Mo's lips curved with a smile, and he said, "Father is known for his love for wine. When the time comes, let father exchange 2 jars of the best daughter red wine in the palace for military talismans. In this way, there is also a reward, and I am not afraid of your Majesty's suspicion." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly heard a loud shout from outside, "Royal travel, get out of the way. Get out of the way." The sound of horse hooves grew louder and louder, clearly coming in their direction. Mo lifted the curtain and coincidentally, dozens of people rode horses past the carriage. Dust was rising recklessly, and almost half of the stalls on both sides were knocked over. However, the vendors dared not speak up and could only clean up on their own. Payemo stared at the figures of dozens of people, with a murderous intent surging in his eyes. Who is it? Murong Qing was curious. Payemo put down the curtain and his expression returned to normal. Second Prince. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Rewards cannot be received. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Rewards cannot be received. The carriage continued heading towards the Southern Marquis' mansion, but the interior of the carriage fell silent. Murong Qing occasionally glanced at Payemo, although she was not quite familiar with him. She always felt that after Payemo said, "Second Prince," her whole body exuded an aura of not being close to strangers. Perhaps the atmosphere was too oppressive, and Murong Qing was idle with nothing to do. He lifted the curtain and saw that he had not yet arrived at the Southern Marquis' mansion. He murmured softly, "This carriage is really slow. It's better to ride a horse and go faster." Payemo looked at her profile with Mo's eyes, and the swaying figure on the racetrack flashed in his mind. A smile appeared. "Madam, you ride a horse, not inferior to a man. How do you know?" Murong Qing blurted out, looking at him suspiciously. "Didn't you send someone to investigate me? Otherwise, how would she know she rode a horse better than a man?" Before Payemo could respond, a familiar voice sounded outside. "General! General!" It's Lu Shen's voice. Payemo immediately frowned and shouted sternly, "Stop the car." The groom quickly tightened the reins, and Lu Shen rode his horse to catch up. Payemo and Murong Qing emerged from the carriage one after another. Lu Shen glanced at Murong Qing and then turned to Payemo, saying, "General, I'm back. The situation is not good, General, let's go take a look first. Your Majesty's reward has been sent to the General's mansion, and he also knows that Payemo is going to the Southern Marquis' mansion." But as soon as he thought about the situation of the person returning, he had to grit his teeth and let Payemo go back first. "As for the Southern Marquis' mansion, we can only go later." Payemo suddenly clenched his hands behind him and turned to look at Murong Qing, saying, "Madam, go to the Marquis' mansion first, and I will arrive at the latest 1 hour later." Although Murong Qing was unaware of what had happened, he naturally guessed that the situation was extraordinary. She nodded slightly and said, "If you have anything to do, go ahead and get busy. I can go alone to the Marquis' mansion." Anyway, her relationship with Payemo was just a transaction. Whether Payemo went to the Marquis' mansion or not was not a big deal for her. I wouldn't force Payemo to go either. Payemo turned his head to look at Lu Shen and said, "Where is the person?" "In the firewood shed in the backyard of the General's mansion, both housekeeper Zhao and Grandma Zhang are guarding. Dr. Li has visited it, but—" Lu Shen finished explaining the general situation, but when he arrived at Lilangjong, he paused. Obviously, the situation is not good. He glanced at Murong Qing, but didn't care much about it. After all, he had already said so much before, and didn't mind saying a few more words. "General, he doesn't want to tell others that he's holding on until the general returns. You go to the Marquis' mansion with your wife, and we'll go back first. Someone, prepare your horse. Take me back to my mansion." A group of skilled soldiers led a special horse with a well-protected saddle on its back, allowing even weak individuals to easily handle it. A few breaths, the soldiers galloped away like silver dragons. Although I had already noticed yesterday that she was just out of the tiger's den and back into the wolf's den, it can only be confirmed now. Although I still don't know what Payemo is hiding, it's definitely not a small matter. Murong Qing raised his eyebrows and looked at Lu Shen beside him. "It seems that there are quite a few things going on in your general's mansion." Lu Shen arched his hand and said, "The princess is now the general's wife, so she can no longer say, 'your general's mansion.' I and my wife are both members of the general's mansion." He deliberately made the 5 words, "your general's mansion," clearer and also intended to remind Murong Qing of the relationship with the general's mansion. Murong Qing had nothing to say, so she didn't want to tell Lu Xun that she and Pei Mo were just trading. She coldly responded, "I've taken note of it. Let's go to the Marquis's mansion." After speaking, he turned around and got on the carriage. Since Lu Xun wanted to follow, he could only sit outside the carriage with the groom, and Ping Er entered the carriage with Murong Qing. Not long after, they arrived at the Marquis's mansion in the southern region, and a few people got off the carriage and headed inside. Qing Er is back. Murong Xiao just picked up the tea on the table and saw Murong Qing walking towards the hall. Several people inside the house got up and walked out one after another. Father, mother, big brother, second brother, third brother. Murong Qing called out his family one by one and then raised a smile at several others. Yesterday's big wedding left in a hurry, and I didn't have time to say a few more words to my family. Now that I'm back, I feel happy. Unfortunately, I can't be with my family for a long time. The third son of the Marquis's mansion, Murong Tai, casually said, "I only married you yesterday and returned today. The woman next to me will return to the door in 3 days. Aren't you driven back by General Pei?" With a fierce expression, the old princess immediately raised her hand and hit him on the back of the head. "You kid, how can you talk to your sister? Murong Qing and Murong Tai are only 1 year apart. They have always liked to argue, but their relationship is still very good. Parents have never stopped them before and let them argue. But at present, Murong Qing was married to the general's mansion by chance and did not marry his beloved. It seems that he must be in a bad mood. Unexpectedly, this young man is still trying to stimulate Murong Qing, and he really lacks vision." Murong Tai rubbed the back of his head and grumbled discontentedly, "I talk to her like this on weekdays, and my mother doesn't know." The old princess was about to speak a few words of advice when Murong Xiao took the lead and said, "Qing'er, how about having your third brother perform an acrobatic performance for you to help with the fun? Left and right are going to punish Murong Tai again." Murong Qing watched his family joking and couldn't be too happy. He didn't argue with Murong Tai, as he was just joking and teasing her. No need, third brother has always been like this, and I haven't been arguing with him for a day or two." Murong Qing lifted his foot and walked into the room, then turned back to look at Ping Er and said, "Ping Er, hurry up and pour me a cup of water. I entered the palace early in the morning, and I didn't even take a sip of tea, so I became thirsty on the way. I was so thirsty that my throat was smoking." While speaking, I saw the imperial edict and military symbols on the table, but I didn't expect them to be delivered quite quickly. But we still need to find a way to go back. Ping Er quickly went to pour tea for Murong Qing. Lu Xun, who was still standing at the door, bowed his hand and said, "See Marquis, Princess, and all the generals. My general has an urgent matter and will come at the latest 1 hour later. I hope for your understanding." "It's okay, come in and have a cup of tea," said Nanjing Wang with a smile. "I dare not." Lu Xun refused and took another step back. "I am the general's guard. How dare I enter the southern Marquis's mansion to drink tea?" The king of the southern realm chuckled and said, "There are not many rules in the southern Marquis's mansion. Besides, I and General Pei are both martial arts practitioners. As his guards, you don't have to be restricted when you come here." Murong Qing followed suit and said, "Speaking of which, your general and I once fought side by side. Since you are his guard, you don't need to be so polite. Come in." The whole family repeatedly requested, but Lu Xun refused and nodded, yes. After everyone entered the room and Murong Qing drank tea, he went to sit next to the king of the southern realm and said, "Father, this military talisman in your official position as the king of the southern realm cannot be taken away. You must retreat." She was afraid that she would forget what Pei Mo had said, so she quickly repeated Pei Mo's words. Even the words of exchanging military symbols for wine were spoken out. The people inside the room had different expressions, and there were both admiration and suspicion in their eyes as they looked at her. The southern king asked her suspiciously, "Did General Pei teach you this method? He knows his own daughter well and can never come up with such a win-win solution. But it has to be said that this method is indeed feasible." End of this chapter.